Welcome to today's Explainer. We're tackling the absolute elephant in the room for importers and product developers everywhere. And let's be real, it's one of the most stressful decisions a business owner can make. This seemingly binary choice you face when deciding exactly where to manufacture your products. For so many businesses, this decision feels like a high-stakes coin toss between two absolute heavyweights. In one corner, you have China, and in the other, you have Vietnam. Okay, let's dive into this, because this entire question, China or Vietnam, is actually built on a massive myth. The myth is that the country with the lowest wages automatically equals the easiest or cheapest place to manufacture your goods. But the reality? A country that works phenomenally well for one product might be a total disaster for another. We really need to look at which manufacturing base actually fits your specific product, your order volume, and the exact supply chain you need. Here is our roadmap for today's Explainer. 1. The manufacturing dilemma. 2. Beyond the factory quote. 3. Flexibility versus specialization. 4. Quality, time, and scale. 5. The tariff and origin trap. And finally, 6. Making your decision. All right, let's get into section 1. The manufacturing dilemma. Assumptions versus reality. Now, what's really interesting about this baseline data is that, on paper, the common assumptions about these two manufacturing giants seem incredibly straightforward. Labor costs, they're generally higher in China, lower in Vietnam. Supplier options are incredibly broad in China, but heavily concentrated in select industries in Vietnam. Product development is highly flexible for prototypes in China, whereas Vietnam depends heavily on the specific product category. But listen, I need to give you a massive warning right now. Basing your entire sourcing strategy purely on this macro-level breakdown is a huge mistake. It's a starting point, for sure, but it completely misses the hidden issues that will actually make or break your cost, quality, and delivery down the line. Moving right along to Section 2, Beyond the Factory Quote, Uncovering Hidden Costs. When you get that initial quotation from a factory, you've got to think of it as just the tip of an iceberg. It is literally only a tiny fraction of what you are actually going to spend to get your product to market. Here is a core realization. A lower labor rate does not automatically produce a lower landed cost. Let me give you an example. Say you move production to Vietnam strictly because the labor is cheaper, but your product requires custom plastic components, metal parts, and specific electronic modules. If that Vietnamese factory has to import all of those specialized materials from somewhere else, maybe even from China, before they can even start manufacturing, your initial labor cost advantage might just evaporate entirely thanks to those logistical hurdles. So what is exactly lurking underwater? Your true landed cost isn't just the unit price. It includes your raw materials and components, your tooling and setup fees, custom packaging, inland transportation to the port, international freight, import duties, and this is absolutely crucial, the cost of rework and defects. If your supplier in China has all your raw materials sitting just 5 miles down the road, their massive efficiency and lower transport costs might completely outweigh the cheaper labor rate of a factory thousands of miles away that's just sitting there waiting on imported inputs. Which brings us to Section 3, Flexibility versus Specialization, the ecosystem effect. And this brilliantly illustrates that a country's manufacturing advantage isn't just about the four walls of a factory, it is about the deep, interconnected business network supporting that factory. China's superpower is its ridiculously broad ecosystem. If you're making consumer electronics, custom hardware, or something that needs rapid prototype revisions, China has the mold makers, the PCB suppliers, the packaging folks, all within the exact same industrial network. You can pivot instantly. Vietnam, on the other hand, isn't just a cheaper China. It has incredibly concentrated strengths in stable, labor-intensive sectors. If you're producing apparel, footwear, or furniture, Vietnam has deeply established, highly efficient export operations tailored exactly to the whole shebang. Let's jump to Section 4, Quality, Time, and Scale, asking the right questions. When folks compare these manufacturing giants, they almost always ask, well, which country has better quality? I'm going to completely flip the script on you here. That is entirely the wrong question to ask. So, the crucial point is, the country matters, but the factory matters more. Both China and Vietnam have absolutely world-class factories, and both have suppliers that will struggle with communication, consistency, and quality control. The geographic borders of a country literally do not dictate how well a specific facility manages its production line. To gauge true quality, lead times, and scale, you really have to get granular. You need to ask specific, micro-level questions. Don't ask, is Vietnam good at manufacturing? Ask, has this specific factory made a similar product before. Ask exactly where the materials are coming from. Because if a factory promises a 30-day lead time, but they spend 20 of those days just waiting for imported fabric, you've got a massive problem. Ask who exactly approves the production sample. And you need to thoroughly understand their minimum order quantity, or MOQ. A Chinese factory might actually be perfectly willing to do a small customized trial run for a new brand, while a massive Vietnamese apparel factory might only want those stable, high-volume repeat export orders.
All right, Section 5, the tariff and origin trap, trade policy nuance.
Trade policy is a massive driver when comparing these two. A lot of companies are highly motivated to move production out of China specifically to avoid tariffs. But doing this without understanding the legalities, it is incredibly dangerous. When you're navigating tariffs, everything hinges on what's called substantial transformation. Simply shipping all your Chinese components over to Vietnam and snapping the final pieces together does not automatically escape U.S. tariffs. You can't just change the shipping location and assume you've magically changed the customs origin. Authorities look at whether the operations actually performed in Vietnam resulted in a substantial transformation of the product. If they determine the assembly was too basic, the product's origin legally remains Chinese, and guess what? You still pay the tariffs, except now you've also paid a fortune to uproot your supply chain. Let's see how this builds, because before you ever restructure production for tariff reasons, you must run through this exact checklist. Number 1, verify your HS classification. 2, check the actual current import duties. 3, rigorously confirm the specific country of origin requirements for your exact product type. And 4, critically, map the source of your major materials. You need a legally sound trade strategy here, not just a new shipping port. Finally, Section 6, making your decision, the sourcing matrix. We've looked at the hidden costs, the ecosystems, the factory-level realities, and the tricky trade policies. Now, let's bring all this data together into a highly practical decision-making matrix for your specific product. If your product requires deep customization, new molds or tooling, uses highly specialized components, or it's in a prototype stage that's going to need frequent design changes, China's deep supplier network is incredibly difficult to beat. On the flip side, if your product is labor-intensive, fits beautifully into an established sector like footwear or wooden furniture, has a highly stable design, and you're going to order consistent, high volumes without messing with the engineering, Vietnam is an incredibly attractive, competitive fit. But hey, remember this. If your operation has the scale, the answer isn't necessarily China or Vietnam. It might actually be both. A lot of highly successful businesses use China for their complex components and heavy product development, while relying on Vietnam for final assembly or for their really standardized high-volume stuff. This mixed strategy optimally protects your margins while actively mitigating your supply chain risk. It is a real game changer. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Are you chasing the cheapest country, or are you chasing the right factory? Because the absolute best sourcing decision never ever comes from just picking a geographic border with the lowest labor rate on a spreadsheet. It comes from comparing the actual factories, their specific capabilities, and the total landed cost they provide for your unique product. Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer. Now go out there and find the factory that perfectly fits your business.